Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, if we can please kindly turn off all cell phones or electronic devices, or please place them on silent. Thank you.
מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אחסר, בינות דשא ירביצני, על מי מנוחות ינהלני, נפשי ישובב, ינחני במעגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא אירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, תשענת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה, אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים.
Chazan Pomerantz Boro has begun our service in memory of our beloved Helen with the familiar words of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. God leads me beside still waters. God guides me on paths of righteousness, revives my soul for the sake of his glory. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod do comfort me. You set a table in the sight of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. The mysteries of life and death are beyond human understanding. We are pained when anguish befalls those whom we love. In sorrow, confronted by death, which has taken Helen Rosen from our midst, we know our frailty. We remember that this life is brief, that eternal life is forever. We pray, dear God, that you grant solace and comfort to those who mourn, whose burden is now sorrow. in the valley of the shadow of death and beside still waters. In those green pastures, you, O Lord, are our shepherd. Be our strength and our shield, our stay and our comfort throughout all our days. Together we say, Amen. Good people, it is heartbreaking to stand before you here today, to pay tribute to Helen and to remember the life that she shared with your dad, Arnold, of blessed memory. They were quite a pair, a wonderful couple who made an indelible impression on everyone that they met. It is so hard, Eileen and Todd, to be with you here today, and Andrew and Sid and David and Deborah. I don't know you, Jess, and your sister Allie, who's at Syracuse, and I'm sure watching us on Zoom, as well as I do Andrew and Sid. But I can say, David and Deborah, that your children, like Eileen and Todd's, are the best, truest tribute to the love and guidance of your mother. They're her legacy. They embody all the values that she instilled in the two of you, that you looked for in your life partners, the life that you created in your home that raised these beautiful children is a reflection of all the love that you shared growing up with your mom and dad. And I hope that the memories of all of those times and your mother's magnetic, dynamic spirit continues to guide your lives, because I know for certain it will guide the lives of your children and someday their children for generations to come. Tehei nishmatat tzrura b'tzrura chaim. May Helen's soul be bound in the bond of eternal life, and her memory be a blessing in your hearts and in your homes forever. Amen. So my honor to call on Joan Ginsberg, close family friend, who will give the first eulogy.
Remembering Helen. I remember Helen as my best friend for over 65 years. I remember Helen as we walked to junior high school, the sidewalks of Forest Hills, and New York City. I remember Helen as a bride when she married Arnie, and what a wonderful mother she has been to Eileen and David, and mother-in-law to Todd and Deborah. I remember Helen as an adoring, proud grandmother to Andrew, Sydney, Allison, and Jessica. I remember Helen as a clever, resourceful woman and consummate news hound. I remember Helen as a top-tier mahjong player. But most of all, I remember Helen as a compassionate, thoughtful, sincere, caring woman who was my perfect best friend and soulmate. A poem, Gone from My Sight, by Henry Van Dyke. I am standing upon the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails to the moving breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and watch her until at length she hangs like a speck of white cloud just where the sea and the sky come to mingle with each other. Then someone at my side says, "There, she is gone." Gone where? Gone from my sight, that is all. She is just as large in mast, hull, and spar as she was when she left my side. And she is just as able to bear her load of living freight to her destined port. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone says, there, she is gone, there are other eyes watching her coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout, here she comes. Thank you.
Andrew and Sydney will come on up together.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. In what would be our final phone call, the last thing my grandma and I discussed wasn't some profound piece of advice or introspective reflection. She said this: "Oh, Andrew, I've started watching the Weekend Today Show again, and I don't think the anchors have the temperament needed for hosting some of the lighter segments." Now, that does not bode well for those anchors because Grandma was a cable news fortune teller. When a new anchor started weekend mornings on MSNBC a few years ago, Grandma told me they wouldn't last long in that time slot. I remember her saying the anchor doesn't match the, quote, tone of the network at that time of day. And of course, she was right. A few months later, the anchor was taken off the air. 2.5 years ago, Grandma complained that MSNBC executives weren't giving fill-in anchor Chris Jansing a shot at anchoring her own show. Fast forward to today, Chris now has her own hour, one of Grandma's favorites. And the night Grandma passed, MSNBC announced that Chris Jansing's hour is so popular, it is being expanded to 2 hours. Grandma would have been a great television news executive. To do the job, you need to understand what motivates people, how they connect with one another, and what's important for the betterment of society. And Grandma did all of that so well. First, she had this innate sense of understanding people. Yes, those on TV, but all of us in real life. What was someone interested in? What did they want to talk about? How could she make their life better? That was clear whenever she spoke to us as grandkids, about asking about our exams, roommates, and extracurriculars. And because like any journalist, she always wanted to be in the know. Whenever I was flying somewhere, as soon as I landed and my phone reconnected to the internet, I could depend on a text from Grandma. Landed, exclamation point. I'd respond, can confirm. She always tracked our flights. Plus, she endlessly supported those she loved, especially us as grandkids. On our campus TV station at Northwestern, viewership is not very high, but Grandma became a staple with our control room staff because when we went live on Facebook at 7 p.m. every Tuesday, the screen in the control room always showed the same notification: Helen Rosen is watching live. And sometimes she was the only one. One of my favorite moments shows her wit when it comes to current events. We were in line at an ice cream shop, and we noticed the person ordering in front of us was President Trump's former advisor, Kellyanne Conway. And she is, of course, known for her use of alternative facts on cable news. So as she's ordering, Grandma leans over to my ear and says, "She ordered chocolate, but I wonder if she'll be served an alternative flavor." During COVID, I was lucky enough to spend many hours on the driveway with Grandma. As the world opened back up, those meetings turned back into phone calls. She loved hearing what we were up to, not just during that day or week, but also how it connected to the larger picture of our lives. Is my data science class helpful for the journalism major? Does a local news internship have anything to do with streaming? Is that new coat really warm enough for the Chicago winter? Like a news executive, she asked the tough questions. And lastly, she'd always see us off in the daylight, standing and waving on the driveway until our car was out of sight. And when it was dark, she'd flicker the front foyer lights as we pulled away. Then she went back inside and watched our drive on Waze. I'd pull into my own driveway and get her text. Arrived? Yes. Grandma was by far my biggest supporter. When nobody else wanted to talk about whether the third hour of the Today Show had too many hosts, Grandma did. She spent hours with me at the museum, and 1 week ago, I'm glad we got to share my on-air debut together. I know she and Grandpa will still be sharing in all the milestones ahead. I love you, and we will miss you.
I just wanted to add that Grandma loved being a grandma. And she was proud of the 4 of us grandchildren. She liked to be in the know about everything, like Andrew said. She was really good at remembering the names and details of all my close friends, even if she had met them only one time, however many years ago. When we would get lunch, she always wanted to know all the details about classes, sorority life, weekend plans, what nail polish color I'm wearing. She liked to be kept up to date. And she was really tech savvy, especially for a grandma. She could use her Bitmojis and emojis and GIFs, and she would teach her friends how to use them too. She had lots of school spirit and watched all of our college football games. I like to think that she was pretty excited for me to be going to Michigan so that she could watch Michigan football now in addition to Northwestern and Syracuse football. And I remember she texted me after Michigan's win against Ohio State in November. And even when I visited her when she was recovering at the end of the year, she asked me what time the playoffs were on New Year's Eve. Grandma was a feminist. She was very proud to have granddaughters pave their way through STEM and sports-related fields and get to live out the opportunities that she didn't necessarily have. I know she'll be supporting us through everything we choose to do in life. There was one time a few months ago I had called her without a text first to see if she was available. I had called her just as she was walking into the clubhouse for Mahjong. As you may know, Grandma takes her Mahjong very seriously, so I said, it's nothing important, I'll let you go. However, she insisted that I talk with her and said, you can call me anytime, I will stop what I'm doing to talk to you. And that meant a lot to me and the relationship that we had. I love you, Grandma, and I am very grateful for the time I got to spend with you. You will be deeply missed. Thank you.
It's an honor to call on Eileen, and Eileen will be followed by David.
Let me start by saying, on behalf of my family and my brother David and his family, how very grateful we are. The last month has been one of the most challenging I personally can ever remember. We are grateful for the love and support of all of you here, those of you online, and even those who are not able to attend today. We are grateful for the amazing care my mom received from her doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists. The list could go on and on. Personally, as weird as it may sound, I'm grateful for the time I got to spend with my mom, sitting with her in the hospital and in rehab. You may be surprised to know, but we had many hours of good conversation. So in a strange way, the time was a gift. Helen Rosen, my mother. How can I possibly explain her to you? She's the youngest child of my grandfather Irving and my grandmother Alice. She had one older brother, Barry, who recently passed away. When my mom was 10 years old, her father died suddenly and unexpectedly at home, while my mom was watching television with him. This loss impacted her for the rest of her life. She worried about everyone and everything and was always afraid of more loss. I guess you could say my mom was the original Life 360 before there was Life 360. She knew our comings and our goings. And then once there really was a Life 360, David and I made sure we didn't mention it to her. I have no doubt she would have tracked my father, her children, our spouses, and all the grandchildren, and maybe even some of you friends and relatives. She met my father, Arnie, the love of her life, at the age of 18 in Queens, New York. She was working as a bookkeeper for an advertising agency at that time. She had promised her mother and her brother that she would eventually go back to school and finish her college degree when she took that job. However, she got married, and then when we were born, she opted to be a stay-at-home mom because she wanted to give David and I what she didn't have. Both she and my father prioritized raising their family, and they valued education. They deliberately worked and saved and sacrificed so that David and I could go to college. My mother was resilient. She always had this expression that she said she got from my grandmother: "You make plans and God laughs." In 1981, she was found to have a small carcinoid tumor in the mainstem bronchus of her right lung, and she needed to have a total right lung resection. It was a very big surgery, especially at that time, and her recovery was rough. But she pulled through and managed to play doubles tennis for a number of years after that. When my father passed away, she was devastated, and we did worry about her. She was at first overwhelmed at having to pay the bills for the first time ever and keep up with the house maintenance and things like that. But honestly, she adapted with ease. And she did it all electronically on her phone. Despite COVID, she navigated a life without him. She missed him dearly, but she reframed things in her mind. She was living for both of them. My mother was an amazing cook. Our dinners were 3 courses growing up: an appetizer, a main course, and dessert every night. Nothing like my own children got. Holiday meals were not complete without her delicious brisket and sweet and sour meatballs. I learned years later that she did not love the grind of having to get dinner on the table every night, but I never noticed that growing up. Unfortunately, as many of you know, I never wanted to learn to cook, though I do know how to make the brisket. In fact, when I was in medical school, my mom was so concerned about my lack of cooking that she would make me individualized packaged dinners that I could freeze and use as needed. This caused my medical school classmates to give me the nickname Frozen Rosen. And they all wanted my mother to cook for them too. Luckily, she found a cooking buddy in Todd. She would discuss recipes and cooking gadgets with him. And she was thrilled, although I was curious, when he bought her a fancy cleaver she had seen on the Food Network. And to this day, I'm not sure why she needed a cleaver, but she said she liked to cut pineapple with it. My mother was extremely, emphasis on the extremely, neat. Everything had a place, and you could eat off the floor in her house. If you dared to eat standing up, she would ask you to sit down and actually follow you around sweeping up the crumbs until you did. One of her really greatest gifts was the ability to make meaningful connections with everyone she met. She always had time to speak with friends, neighbors, and acquaintances about anything and everything. She loved recommending books and movies and sharing recipes. One of her friends recently called her the Queen of Hospitality. She remembered all the details from your last conversation, whether it was a week or 3 years since you last saw her and spoke to her. And if you actually liked a book or recipe or a movie that she shared, then she would forever send you things in the future she thought you would like. She would learn your tastes. She was a loyal friend who always gave of herself to her family and friends, and you could rely on her to help you if you needed it. And most of the time, you didn't even have to ask. She just knew what to do. It came so easy to her. She was also direct and did not hesitate to tell you if she thought there was a better way to do or maybe think about things, sometimes when you didn't even ask for her opinion. but all the time she did it because she cared deeply about you. And these qualities are the reasons she had lifelong friends and easily made new ones wherever she went. 17 years ago, when my parents moved to Four Seasons from Marlborough, after my dad retired so they could be closer to the children and their grandchildren, I worried because they left behind wonderful friends and neighbors. But there was always more room for friendships, and Mom and my dad developed wonderful relationships. And during this time, my mom particularly enjoyed being with friends at mahjong games, maybe because I think she won a lot after I saw some of the texts that happened, going to the clubhouse for that, and going to Juliet luncheons with the women in the community. She was an avid reader, often reading more than one book at a time, and she loved participating in her community book club. And when I would want to select books to read on vacation, I would call her, and she would have selected a list of books that she had read over the last year that she saved for me. And even during her recent 3.5 weeks in the hospital, she was telling all the women physicians they needed to be reading and recommending books for them. She had a thirst for knowledge and kept up with multiple news sources and regularly attended community lectures. She was a true news junkie. There was always a television with the news on in the house. She was our own personal command center. Action News, Weather Channel, Traffic Cam, all in one. If there was an accident on my drive home or a problem with the weather, she was sure to alert me before I was driving. I often called her on my drive home from work, and she would digest the day's news for me. She loved history. She was especially American and British history, and she was fascinated by the monarchy. She was extremely concerned, particularly recently, about the state of our country, how we treat and respect each other, and she was particularly concerned about women's rights. My mom was brilliant. She knew something about everything. She had an unbelievable memory. She remembered names, books, movies, and life events with detail that would always amaze me. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do now that I can't pick up the phone and say, "Do you remember?" And she'll tell me the story. But the most important thing I'm going to tell you about my mother is that she loved and valued family above everything else. Nothing meant more or brought more joy than being with my father, her children, and her grandchildren. She cherished family gatherings and celebrations. Although she lost both her parents by the time she was 30, she had wonderful relationships with her own aunts and uncles. Simply put, my mother was the proud matriarch of our family. Mom, there are no words to express how much I love you and how grateful I am for all that you provided for Dad, David, and me, for the support and friendship you have shared with me, for the love and care you gave to me, Todd, Andrew, and Sydney, and yes, your granddog Max too. I miss you so much already, and I'm still trying to figure out how I will ever fill the void I feel in your absence. I know you wanted to stay and fought as hard as you could. And although I'm not ready for you to go, the truth is we would never be ready. You make plans, and God laughs. Andrew and Sydney are blessed to have each had their own special relationship with you, and I am grateful for the time they had with both you and Dad. I will do my best to continue to make you proud and honor your memory. I hope you are dancing with Dad and your parents, Uncle Barry, Stacy, Aunt Sarah and Uncle Lou, Aunt Reva, Uncle Hi, Phyllis, Arlene, and Nikki. I love you, Mom. Thank you.
right, so if you've been to a family baby naming before, you know how this is going to go. And I apologize in advance. Thank you all for coming today to honor the life of my mother, Helen Rosen. And let me echo what Eileen said about the amazing care Mom received, not only over the last month while in the hospital and rehab, but over the years. Her medical team treated her like royalty, and she was so very appreciative of how wonderfully everybody cared for her. Mom and Dad were married for almost 57 years before his passing in November 2019. Their anniversary is February 3rd, and they are now together again to continue celebrating the life they built together. I honestly can't believe that we are here today. Mom, always the fighter, had beaten the odds and seemed on her way to making a good recovery and probably going home soon. I knew she was feeling better because she was back to giving me the business. Why haven't you shaved? You know I don't like the scruff. You're running around too much. You need your rest. Are you eating? You know you need to eat better and take care of yourself. I worry about you. Phrases Mom said to me all the time. She also worried about me when I was working an EMS shift. We had a routine where we'd talk or at least text in the hours leading up to the start of my shift. And she wanted me to let her know as soon as I had clocked out and was on my way home. I felt bad that she worried so much about me and told her I was safe because I was surrounded by some of the bravest and finest men and women I know and had the honor to serve with. She didn't say it much, but I knew she was proud of me for becoming an EMT. And I never missed an opportunity to tell her it's because of how she and Dad raised me and Eileen that we both work in careers where we get to help others, at times complete strangers on the worst days of their lives. But Mom didn't just worry about me and Deborah and Allison and Jessica and Eileen and Todd and Andrew and Sydney. She worried about all of you, too. You were all her people, and she cared about you, just like she cared about us. Sorry, give me a minute. She was blessed to have you in her life, and was richer than any of us can imagine because of this. Let me thank you on behalf of Mom for being special parts of each phase of her life. Mom and I had a very special relationship over the past 52 years, and as many of you know, there were times where it was questionable whether or not she was going to let me live. I mean, I could tell the story of Florida and all these things, but Mom and I balanced each other out. Me being the smartass who knew what buttons to push with varying levels of intensity, and she, the David Rosen circus ringmaster, who effectively and efficiently put me back in my place and on track when I'd gone a little too far. It was a constant ride on the seesaw, and no matter how much we were frustrated with each other, we always made up, put it behind us quickly, found some silly topic to talk about and laugh about, and ended every conversation with "I love you." And if one of us hung up too quickly and thought the other didn't hear those three precious and important words, we called right back and said it again just to be sure. Like Eileen, I too got to spend a lot of time with Mom the last month When she went into the hospital, Eileen and I went into that mode we would naturally fall into when Dad was in the hospital. We started talking seamlessly all the time, constantly coordinated mom coverage to ensure that she had one of us with her as much as possible, and we're on call at all hours should she need something. Again, this is due to how Mom and Dad raised us, to care for others, jump in early when somebody needed help, and sacrifice for the sake of others. It's natural for Eileen and I, and a quality I'm so proud to have because of Mom and Dad. Once Mom started to turn the corner in the ICU, we spent many hours watching some of her favorite shows, among them The News, Jeopardy, and General Hospital. She was adamant that if she was sleeping and it was 3 p.m., she was to be woken up so that she could watch GH. After a few days, the medical team knew not to come into her room between 3 and 4 o'clock to do anything that would distract her from General Hospital. And we talked a lot about so many different topics. While the circumstances for why we were spending so much time together over the 24 days she was in the hospital were painful and stressful, the time we did spend together means the world to me. And I'm so glad we had that special time together. And I'll treasure this forever. Mom was fiercely loyal and was quick to protect her family and friends. One specific circumstance has stayed with me for a very long time. I was in my first year of Hebrew school in Marlborough, New Jersey, and on the first day of class, my teacher, Mrs. Russo, went around the class asking each student their Hebrew name. And when she got to me, she said something to the effect of, "David Rosen, your name is David." And I moved on to the next student. I interrupted her, politely of course, per mom, and said that my Hebrew name was Shlomo and not David. Mrs. Russo and I went back and forth for a little bit, her saying it wasn't possible, me saying that it was my Hebrew name. Eventually, I was sent to the principal's office, and I called Mom to tell her what happened. Her response was, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. When she blew through the door to the principal's office, she was livid. She told me to follow her, and we walked down the hall to Mrs. Russo's classroom. She calmly opened the door and asked Mrs. Russo to come into the hallway. In that moment, I truly felt bad for Mrs. Russo because she was about to get a dose of Helen that I had been getting for a long time. By the time Mom was done with Mrs. Russo, I could do no wrong in her class for the rest of the school year. That day, I probably could have asked Mrs. Russo for her car keys and driven off if I could have reached the pedals. Mom was my biggest fan, and there's going to be such a huge void in my life now that she's gone. But I'm comforted in knowing that she passed peacefully and is now laughing and smiling with Dad and our dog Winston, and picking right up where she left off with her mom and dad, Alice and Irving, her older brother Barry, and her Dad's mom and dad, Mildred and Ted, his sister Barbara and her husband Warren, her niece Stacy, and Uncle Lou, Aunt Reva, Aunt Bee, and Uncle Hi, and so many of her friends who left her way too soon. I bet she's already got a Mahjong league set up, and is an ambassador, working at the reception desk, and ready to help anyone who needs it. It's because she didn't know how to live any other way. And that's what made my mom the most amazing person I know. Almost done, I promise. I'd like to finish by reading a poem I found in a picture frame in her house that clearly had an impact on her. It's called My Mother Kept a Garden, and the author is unknown. My mother kept a garden of the heart. She planted all the good things that gave my life its start. She turned me to the sunshine and encouraged me to dream, fostering and nurturing the seeds of self-esteem. And when the winds and rain came, she protected me enough but not too much because she knew I need to stand up strong and tough. Her constant good example always taught me right from wrong, markers for my pathway that will last a lifetime long. I am my mother's garden. I am her legacy, and I hope today she feels the love reflected back from me. Please give Dad and Winston a big hug and kiss, and don't worry about us. We'll be okay, and we'll look out for each other. If we can do that half as good as you did, we'll be doing an amazing job. Deborah, Allie, Jess and I miss you, but we know you'll always be with us in our hearts. Thank you for everything. I love you so much. Thank you.
Listening to all of you, I'm reminded of the adage that words that come from the heart enter into the heart. And yours most certainly did both. Every single thought, word, and memory that you found the courage and strength to share today truly were from the heart and entered the hearts of all those who heard them. So last night, when Chazan and I got to Eileen and Todd's house for what would turn out to be a very meaningful conversation about the extraordinary life of Helen Rosen, with those who loved and were so deeply impacted by her, including David and Deborah, grandchildren and close friends. The gracious host that you are, you offered us a drink. I asked for a cup of water, and possibly channeling Helen's tendency toward order and neatness, it came with a coaster. Printed on the coaster, one of a set that pays a kind of sharp tribute to Jewish mothers everywhere, were these words: "It's like no one in my family appreciates that I stayed up all night overthinking for them." Mom. Now, your mom did not stay up all night overthinking for you, but she was certainly someone who had you on her mind at all times. The original Life 360 app, indeed. For those who don't know, by the way, that's the way we track our kids today. Or, in a word to the wise, it's at least how we track our kids' phones. I have learned that there can at times be a difference. Such was her care, concern, and her abiding, unending love for all of you, that not knowing what you were up to, or at least where you were up to it, was simply not an option. I want to say that one of the challenging things about being new to a community is that at funerals, at least for the time being, everyone in the room knows the person being remembered much better than I did. And although it was not a main point that you focused on in the wonderful conversation we had, I was heartened to know that one thing you remember about Helen is how she was the person who would welcome anyone who was new to a group that she was part of. And it's a special trait, especially from someone who clearly had many very good friends. So much so that when COVID hit, staying in touch with them in a meaningful way was explored and accomplished, including by somehow figuring out how to play mahjong via Zoom. It's not always possible in life to keep friends for decades. I get that. And plenty of very fine people I know have not been blessed with that particular good fortune. But over years of officiating at funerals, I have found that being able to do so is often extremely well correlated with being someone who is appreciated and respected for who they are. Helen had the capacity to keep old friends. She was also open to making new ones. And I hope you agree that it is a very special thing to recognize and affirm today. Her life's journey took her from Brooklyn to Queens to Marlborough to Woolwich. Her partnership with Arnie of almost 57 years was a foundation of the homes she ran with efficiency, orderliness, and the desire to make sure they were places of safety and warmth for you. No one knows the answer to the question of nature or nurture being more determinative in who we become. Our Jewish lesson has for millennia that it is both. In Helen's case, you surmise, I think correctly, that the tremendous instability and unpredictability wrought by her father's very early death at 44 when she was just 10 led her to want to give you what she did not have, and it included the opportunity to be educated beyond your own reading, even if I bet her avid reading and endless news watching contributed to her being a very successful at-home Jeopardy player. It included providing you a home that you could rely on. It perhaps even led to her deep involvement in your lives, since her own mother had no choice but to go to work for long hours to provide even the relatively meager sustenance that she grew up with. To be able to grow from adversity and translate those experiences into loving and constructive commitments is an admirable trait. I might suggest it is also a very Jewish trait. Other peoples have had hardship and have suffered. We should never claim to have a monopoly on such unwelcome things. Yet it is quite possible that over the last 2,500 years, no people has had quite as much stress placed on its very existence while still finding a way to push forward than the Jewish people has. Through it all, again and again, we did what Helen did. We found ways to persevere. We accessed this extraordinary trait of resilience. And we doubled down on ethical living, the building of welcoming homes based on positive values, and on learning. We carried the bitter parts of our past with us without becoming embittered by them. Helen was a paragon of perseverance, and early, if not founding members of the Marlborough Jewish Center, David had his bar mitzvah, and these grandchildren know well how important Jewish identity is to this family. The greatly in the form of all of you and her impact on her many friends. The sadness of loss, though, will please necessarily very heavy today.